All right, we are here for the Friday Night Drive recap as we look back at the quarterfinals here on Shaw Local Sports. My name is Matt Rodewald, joined as always by Steve Soucie. Hello, friend. How was your weekend of football everywhere?
It was pretty good. I'll take it. I'll always take a good solid weekend of playoff football, and was only able to get 2 games in this weekend, but still mighty eventful, and I enjoyed it very much.
I squeezed 2 games in. I was hoping to get 3. Couldn't do that. We're in the beginning of youth basketball season, so Coach Rodey over here had. Of course, the 12:20 start time does me no good on a Saturday when there's a whole boatload of 1:00 games. So
yeah,
that wasn't happening for me on Saturday. But I was lucked out, and I got to one, and we'll talk about that here, and we'll talk about all the things that everyone else had a chance to see over the course of the weekend, the power conferences, the surprises, what have you. And just kind of what everyone took away from the weekend. And you know what? I love Friday night quarterfinal football. Don't take that away from me. More Friday night, please, because I thought we didn't see a lot of tight games, but we learned a lot about a lot of teams. So we'll get to that here as we go through it first. I just wanted to kind of ask you just about the power conferences as we kind of start things off here. The one thing I started to notice as we got to the end of Saturday here is I was calling the in-between game at St. Rita. There's the 1:00 and then there's the 6s. I had the 3:00 start time. So I noticed that everyone's coming away with Catholic League win, Catholic League win, Catholic League win. Boy, they are showing their mettle in this postseason, aren't they?
Yeah, and it was kind of the expectation too, especially the way that you looked at some of the brackets, the way that they set up. Some of the under seeds, the seeds, 9 and below. Some of those teams from the Catholic League that were slotting in at a 12 or a 13, or even when you get into the 1 to 32 fields, you have Mount Carmel at a 19, St. Rita at a 10. I mean, these are really, really good football teams that the seed did not recognize that with the way that this is done. So, 8 getting through to the semifinal round here. That was pretty much the number that I kind of expected, even back when the brackets came out. I figured it was probably going to be somewhere in the 8 to 10 variety, just based on where all these teams were, particularly a logjam in 5A where 3 of the 4 semifinalists are from the Chicago Catholic League, guaranteed that we'll get at least one in the final and maybe a repeat performance of basically a conference meeting in the 5A final. That's a possibility as well. So, it doesn't really surprise me. Maybe the identities of a few of them do, but the fact that there were so many, not really a shock.
The Southwest Valley has been intriguing to me throughout the entire year. And let's throw the bouquet of flowers at Lincoln Way Central, because we have not talked about them very much at all over the course of the last 12 weeks or so. What's making them so good? What do they do Friday night the right way?
Well, I mean, basically, this is a team that's kind of just dramatically gotten better, particularly on offense. This was a team early in the year that maybe you didn't really know what was going on with their offense, but they've kind of formulated a thunder and lightning attack out of the backfield. They're perfectly content to try to put together long drives and keep the opponent off the field. And they've got a pretty good defense. That's been a consistently good defense the entire season. So the combination of those two things. But I'll tell you, when the bracket came out, I looked at that 7A field and I said to myself, there's going to be an underseed that comes out of that top quadrant. And I think we even talked about this at the time.
We did.
I thought Lincoln Way Central was a prime candidate to be that team. I'm not really that surprised to see that they are now at this point in time.
I just thought that would be Bradley Bourbonnais, but we're on the right track about which conference was going to take that spot. So I was very impressed to see what they've done throughout the season. And of course, we can talk about Lincoln Way East all we want and how the rest of that conference goes throughout the rest of the season, and the Napervilles as well, and how they performed in the postseason as well. Is there a conference that surprised you in terms of how many getting multiples through?
Not really. I mean, maybe a little bit. You got to go maybe down to the Illini Prairie. I'm a little bit surprised that there's a semifinal with 2 teams from that conference. Maybe not surprised that they got 2 teams, just maybe a little surprised at who those 2 teams were, to be completely honest with you. So Tolono Unity has had a really impressive turnaround in the second half of the season. And now it looks like, even with 3 losses, I think they have a pretty good chance of getting themselves back to the title game, considering they beat the team that they're playing in the semifinals by 2 touchdowns back in week 9. So a good situation for them. But, Illinois Central 8, if you would have told me that the Coal City and Wilmington were going to be moving through, I would have said, I can see that. So that one doesn't really surprise me all that much either. So, when it comes right down to it, the elite teams at the top of their conferences perform the way that I kind of expected them to, and that's why they're still here.
And, of course, the other one would be the Duquesne with Geneva Batavia, and they're both in the semifinals. That's only happened one other time that those two teams have gotten to the semifinal round, but they played each other. That was 2006. So it's been 18 years since both of them have been this deep in the postseason together. All right, I want to kind of go down the classes. Last week we went 8 on down. This week we're going to work in the reverse here to kind of talk about these quarterfinal rounds. I want to talk about 1A first and just kind of get your lay of the land here. Again, Lena Winslow keeps crushing people, and they quietly keep doing what they do. But I was very impressed with Camp Point Central pulling out that grinder of a win in a rematch against Calhoun, a game they lost earlier in the year.
To me, the 1A field is pretty interesting just in the way that it kind of, in the postseason, you don't usually see a situation where you can say, these are who I think the Final Four teams are going to be when the brackets are released. And to be honest with you, I kind of saw this coming. I felt like these were the 4. And these 4, for the most part, have not really had many problems in being those 4. Belleville-Altoff was dominant against Casey Westfield. Leroy won comfortably over Galena. Camp Point had to scuffle to beat Hardin Calhoun, and that was kind of expected considering earlier in the year Hardin Calhoun got them. And like you mentioned, Lena Winslow, once again, not having any problems. So this is one of those rare circumstances where you could kind of look at this field, say, I think these are the 4 best teams, and the 4 best teams delivered on that every step of the way. Because prior to that Camp Point Central game this week, I don't think any of those 4 have really been pushed in getting here.
Yeah, and the thing is, with the 2 teams that were playing for the 1A title game the last 2 years in Camp Point Central and Lena Winslow, those 2 have some serious challenges waiting in front of them. Lena's got to go down to Leroy to play them. And, of course, the rematch between Camp Point Central and Altoff Catholic. Last year, this was at Camp Point Central when the wheels came off for Altoff in that first half. They got to go to Altoff this time around, and I think that's going to be a very different environment for Camp Point Central to try and come out. It'd be tough sledding for the Panthers for sure.
Yeah, I would imagine that kind of reversal of roles in that situation will be difficult. But I'm not going to say anything like I did last year, where I basically discounted the possibility of Camp Point Central winning that game last year. I've learned my lesson. I'm going to do one of these and just shut my mouth and not make any declarations of that kind.
All right, let's move on to 2A here and talk about Quincy Notre Dame and Maroa Forsyth. I'm going to ask, was that the state championship game that we saw in the quarterfinals, or was it close?
It sure felt like it. I was able to catch up with some highlights on that game, and it looked like 2 really evenly matched football teams right there. Maroa basically going the length of the field to score the touchdown that they needed, and then taking that 2-point conversion in to win it with less than a minute left in the game. I felt like Quincy Notre Dame, was probably my favorite heading into the bracket here.
Yeah.
You can never really discount Maroa Forsyth in the postseason. This is a team that always seems to, find a way to make a deep run. They might not have the championships that they might have wanted, but it seems almost unlikely that you're going to see them getting pushed out of the tournament before maybe the semifinal round. It feels like they're there almost every single year. So a really good win there. And then you kind of look at the context of the rest of the fields here. You got Farmington, you've got Chicago Christian, who are both making their first ever appearance in a semifinal round game. Johnston City is your other team in the bracket. They've only made 1 semifinal appearance. So you've got the postseason fixture and essentially 3 newcomers left in the 2A bracket. So it's almost the polar opposite of Class 1A when you've got all kinds of usual suspects roaming around the semifinal bracket. And here in 2A, you've got several teams that are going to have the opportunity here to make their first ever state championship game appearance.
The question I have to ask with 2A, obviously, 1, did you expect to see a Chicago Christian Farmington game? But knowing Farmington's pedigree, and I actually played for Ron Elbert's kids, so I know a little bit about Farmington football. The thing that you have to understand is that what is that environment going to look like on Saturday? That has to be as electric of an environment as we'll have across the state.
Yeah, I would have to imagine. I mean, like I said, both of those programs are in rarefied air for them. But Farmington has put up some impressive numbers over the past couple of years. But as far as being able to translate it to the postseason, they haven't quite been able to do that. But it looks like this year they finally put that together. And I'm really interested in the Chicago Christian team. I just think it was one of those things that they were just kind of flying a little bit under the radar. People weren't really noticing them because as far as the pecking order goes in their conference, Chicagoland Christian, Wheaton Academy kind of established itself as the best team in that league. Chicago Christian obviously slotted in right behind them, but
yeah,
really noticed them that well. And, I thought the alarm bells kind of went off for me in the quarterfinal round when they were able to beat Tri-Valley. I'm like, oh, maybe we got
that
something.
That caught my attention, yeah.
So then and then for them to move on and get to this point, I would not be surprised to see them finish the deal here and possibly go over there and get that win.
Can we give a little farewell to Dwight and their run? Because this was fabulous for that community for both Dwight and Gardner South Wilmington, that whole area. Just that had to be fun just to be a part of. And yeah, it ended in ugly fashion at 42-7 loss, but the town's going to be like, yeah, who cares about that? We got to the quarterfinals. That was fun.
Yeah, you can't take away those 2 wins. I mean, that's something that is, I mean, that's a hallmark for this program moving forward. They've never done that before. So even though, like you said, it didn't end the way that they wanted it to, you really can't take away the accomplishment that they've had this year. And that was one of them that, to be frank, kind of came out of nowhere for me, to be completely honest with you. I thought they might have been a little bit overmatched in their opening round matchup. They blew out Moments, and then finishing off Elmwood in the fashion that they did, that was really impressive for them too. So a nice job for them all around.
Last thing, and we'll move on because we got to give some love to our Johnson City folks down there, because that's going to be fun with Maroa coming to town. But here they are; they've been tested. We're just going to go ahead and just lay on the Dixon thickness because, hey, you played Dixon and you had that big game down in your building, and now you know what that big game is going to feel like.
Well, and the reason that Johnson City game is being played at Johnson City is because they played the Dixon game. So if they had not done that and just taken the forfeit win, Maroa Forsyth would be hosting that game this week. So that's one of the crazy things about how it all played out.
You're listening to the Friday Night Drive podcast here as we recap our quarterfinal round here on Shaw Local. Matt Rodewald, Steve Soucie with you here. We're moving to 3A here because you had a chance to go up to lovely Pecatonica, home of the Indians, and watch a little Dupec football. What was the environment like? What was it like for folks from Wilmington coming up there?
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting situation. It was, and I was talking about it with somebody at halftime of that game. It's, for the playoffs, because of their cooperative agreement, Dupec is a 3A school. It's really a 1A school. It is. It's definitely a small school environment. Nice facility. It's still a grass field, but it's very well done. And of course, it has that kind of country spun to it. The Wilmington sideline did not have bleachers. They just had a hill right next to a barn. So that tells you, hey, this is a 1A program. I mean, that's just kind of what it was, but it was a nice environment. I think it was, there was an embankment. It wasn't like you were like on flat ground and just standing there, like not having a good vista to watch the game. It was fine. Like I said, and it was definitely kind of an interesting contest. And it was once again a testament. And I already knew this going into it. Wilmington has a really interesting offense, but man, their defense for that level of football is special. Those guys can really do some things, and it was even more impressive because they lost their all-stater on the first play of the game, and he's a two-way guy that is basically the captain of their defense, and they still put together a huge defensive performance against one of the all-time greats at that lower level classifications as far as quarterback productivity, and they held the guy to like 130 yards passing. I mean, it was really, really an impressive effort.
I would argue the best small school semifinal in the state is going to be this one, Wilmington and Montini coming up. What do you expect just looking ahead? They got to go to Montini. That environment is going to be loud. and very, very much a vibrant environment. We won't have 15 inches of snow like we did a decade ago when Prairie Ridge came there, but think about that. They used to have a Prairie Ridge team come there. Now it's Wilmington coming there. Times have changed in Montini.
Yeah, it's definitely a situation that you have to take into mind. And this is a conversation for a later day, but I mean, if Montini is already assured that this is going to be their last run in 3A, that's a conversation for another day. But Wilmington will go in there, knowing that it's going to be a difficult climb for them. This is a team that mirrors them in a lot of ways. They want to run the football. They lean on their defense. I think they're separated by, I believe, 3 points this year in terms of points allowed over the course of the season, and it isn't many. So they're really kind of the same teams in a lot of ways. Montini's a little bit bigger. Montini's got the pedigree of playing a monster schedule and surviving the way that they have. Wilmington ain't going to back down from anybody, but this is going to be a very difficult challenge for them.
You're going to find out what kind of defense is going to show up in that one for sure early on as they battle on Saturday. Montini and Wilmington, 1 o'clock kick up there in Lombard. Kudos to Princeton. I always feel bad because no way to hide that. Sorry, I'm going to sneeze right in the middle of the broadcast. But there's no there's just no good route for Princeton because it's always the quarterfinals. Each and every year they get there. Now, this one probably – they're all painful, but this one isn't as heartbreaking, so to speak, as, say, an overtime loss or a last-second loss. But, Princeton continue. I didn't see much from them this year in terms of the idea of them getting deep into the postseason. They found their way in the quarterfinals, which is more than I expected.
Yeah, it's just a program now that you can count on certain things from. You get into the regular season, they may lose a game or two. That doesn't happen extremely often, but they're going to put themselves into the playoffs with a pretty good seed. And they don't usually they're not the kind of team that goes into a playoff game and doesn't put forth its best effort. Montini, obviously a big monster to try to knock out. They weren't able to do it, but moving to the quarterfinals in this bracket is pretty impressive because you look at that North bracket with Wilmington moving up to 3A, you were going to run into one of 3 teams if you were Princeton in this situation. You were going to run into either Byron, Montini, or Wilmington, depending on how the bracket fell. And that was going to happen at best in the quarterfinals. I mean, that's just the way that it was going to happen. You were going to get one of those teams. And unfortunately for Princeton, it came to the end there. But, getting to that point is still showing the steadiness in that program.
Looking at the other side of the bracket, and we talked about unity, but let's note 47 points on Nashville's defense is a lot. I'll say that for sure. But the Monticello-Benton game ended in interesting fashion, and we had the conversation. We get to have this again, this time in overtime. You going for 2 in the win?
Yeah, it was definitely one of those things where you kind of look at it and you wonder what went behind the decision-making process. I didn't really know a lot about how that game was developing. It was kind of one of those things that I was tracking as I was watching another one. I don't know, if it was one of those situations where they rallied and felt like they were lucky to get back, and that it was like we got to go for it now because maybe we won't get another opportunity. I don't know the circumstance behind it. It's always tough to see what you're doing in that situation and what you're choosing. So I don't know what the problem, what the scenario was.
Yeah, and we talked about this a lot. We're not second guessing, but it's always fascinating to look at that moment and say, okay, they're going to go for 2 in the win. They're also on the road. They have the momentum. Can you just kind of make a quick decision and do it? Or did you have that decision already in place? Did you talk about it on Wednesday and say, hey, if this is what happens, this is what we're going to do? Do you ask the kids? What did the kids want to do? There's all sorts of variables that go into it. So not second guessing at all, but certainly fascinating to always see the result. And then the conversation afterwards of, man, what if, what could have been for sure. But, Monticello and Unity should be a really good one coming up for us on Saturday as well. Let's move to 4A here as we go through it here. Breeze Central had a heck of a season, but boy, their offense ran into a buzzsaw with Mount Zion on over the course of this weekend, huh?
Yeah, this is one of those things where you kind of have to understand the underlying scenario. Mount Zion, you look at their record and you look at kind of what went on during their regular season. and you didn't get the real good picture of what the Braves are really about. They have some crazy offensive talent that they've been banged up a little bit all year. It looks like they're fully healthy. They've got
I think that's the case. Yeah,
a line I recruit in Braden Trimble at wide receiver. They've got J.C. Anderson at tight end, a kid that is a junior but is getting offers from name an elite college powerhouse, and he's got an offer from them.
Those two are exceptional athletes. Some in March they were in the quarterfinal. They were in the semis of the basketball tournament. So I got to see them up close and personal. They were really good.
Yeah. So this is not. I mean, this is not a situation where it was like, oh, shocking that the undefeated Breeze Central team got beat by this football team, because it looks like they've finally got the pieces in the right places and everybody is ready to go there. It's a far cry from when they lost in the middle. They took a regular season, lost to Mattoon, that I was like, what happened there? And then I started to get a little bit more information about what happened. It was a weather night. There were some people hurt. It was just like, but now it looks like this is a full scheme Mount Zion team. And at the beginning of the year, that was the reason why I was ranking them in the state polls, because I thought that they had this kind of potential. It's good to see them putting it all together. Unfortunate for Breeze Central that they ran into,
best season they've ever had.
Yep, but it was a definitely impressive finish for them.
At U-High, where is that game on Saturday? Is that going to be in Hancock Stadium? Do we know that for sure?
I think it might be. Yeah, I'm not positive, but that's where they play a fair amount of their home games. So
they played their second round game there.
It would not surprise me if it was. Yes.
So the point being is that if U-High wins, they could basically play at home in the state championship game here. If they can get a win against Mount Zion on Saturday night, they could find themselves playing Friday night, at home. And normally when we go down there for the state championship games, 1A through 4A, it's a lot of families, not a ton of students. There are students, but again, there's small schools. If you have a team from Normal playing in Normal, which we haven't had in one of these state championships, even when they were in DeKalb, Sycamore got close. When we had it down to Champaign, Unity got close. But it's one of those situations where there could be a big crowd for that one in 4A, no matter who it is. And so if you're on the other side of that, Coal City, DePaul, you could be facing a straight road game no matter what happens to you on Saturday.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier this week that if Normal University wins that game, they will easily take the crown for the shortest commute to a state championship game in any
next
sport.
Door.
In any sport, I think, to be honest with you. Yes. So I think I will walk farther from my car to watch that game than the Normal University high school football team will have to walk to play in the state championship game.
I would have to dig to see if there was like a swim team that won in their own pool, or a volleyball team that won in their own building, especially on the boys' side, because that's something that's easy enough. But yeah, that's a really good that's a really bad research project that I'm going to waste a lot of time on here in these next 3 or 4 weeks there. So not going to be productive at work. But how about DePaul with their win over St. Lawrence? We thought St. Lawrence was going to be really good throughout the course of the season. I think we've been just continually impressed with DePaul over and over and over again. And their winning never ceases to amaze us.
Yeah, they seemingly have the knack, because if you go and you look at their schedule, even getting to this point, it feels like they're only possessed with getting a W. They don't really care if they've beat you badly or run you off the field. The W is all that matters. I mean, they did a really great job on Saturday and beating St. Lawrence. Scored 26 unanswered points and basically looked like they were out of it at halftime, had not scored at all, and scores all the points in the second half, limits St. Lawrence to nothing, and sends themselves into the semifinals. I mean, it's really kind of a remarkable story. Hadn't even been in the playoffs since 2015. You have to go back to 2005 when they weren't even known as DePaul Prep to find their last playoff win. And then you got to go back to 1980 to find the last time that the school has advanced this far, when they actually won a state championship that year. But, I mean, you want to talk about teams that were completely off my radar to be playing in a semifinal back at the beginning of the year. I honestly believe my evaluation was, if things break right, they might be able to make the playoffs as a 5-4 team. That was my analysis of DePaul back in August. They really crammed that right back at me.
And I'll tell you what, athletic director of the year, Pat Mahoney, because you're looking at what they've done with basketball, what they've done with football here in these last 6 months or so. it's been fascinating to see. But they're going to go into one heck of an environment down there in Coal City. That's a football town. What do you think Saturday is going to look like at that building?
Yeah, it should be pretty zany, to be completely honest with you. You're right. It's definitely a community that embraces its football. I have seen a number of crazy Coal City playoff games, that I can go back through. Unfortunately, I won't have the background setting for some of them. I've seen a lot of snow bowls at Coal City, believe it or not. So, but yeah, it's definitely a place that embraces their football team. I expect the energy to be really, really high there. I'm not going to that game on Saturday, but I might talk myself into changing my schedule, to be completely honest with you. I think I was thinking about doing it. I haven't really decided what my early game is going to be on Saturday. I might change my mind, to be honest with you.
If you think about the schedule, how it lays out in 4A for the folks from Coal City, and I'm sure there's some diehards that are thinking of this, they win that game and clinch a bid to the state championship, they can go down to Normal and watch the 7 o'clock game between Mount Zion and U-High, because they play 1 and 7. So those are different, time slots that you can hop on I-55 and go check it out. So it'll be curious to see how many people actually do that. On to 5A we go as we continue here on the Friday Night Drive podcast as we recap the quarterfinals and look ahead. And all I see in Class 5A are private schools and rivalries going forward.
Yeah, that was kind of the way it broke down. And you could see that kind of percolating over the last couple of weeks, especially based on how some of those teams were playing. You look at that top semifinal between St. Francis and Nazareth, and they've already played this year, but I remember in the chaos of week 9, we didn't really talk about the fact that St. Francis beat Nazareth in that game. It was just kind of like, oh yeah, that happened. Let's go back to figuring out what happens with the playoff field. So it kind of got put on the back burner. But now looking at it now, you're like, man, that's kind of an interesting result to look back at. The high scoring game, St. Francis kind of pulls it out of the fire. Can they do it again? The game's at Nazareth. Nazareth trying to protect that state title, win another one. There's just a lot of interesting underlying stories in that game. I expect that to be a whirlwind. And we were talking about, this is the game that right now I'm leaning towards going to at 1 o'clock on the afternoon on Saturday, just because I'm so intrigued about seeing what happens here.
And I look at how they got there, and just I'm still kind of shaking my head, and maybe it's just some confirmation bias because I really like the Interstate 8 conference, being out here in the western suburbs. But is Rochelle that far apart from Nazareth in Class 5A? You have to be surprised at the score a little bit going into Rochelle in that environment and getting that kind of win. On the flip side, St. Francis going to Sycamore, that kind of football town, and shutting out an offense that has put 50 on the board pretty much every week, all of course, the last 10 to 12 weeks.
Yeah, I kind of felt like these were going to be the results that we got. The actual scores that came out of those games, both of them caused me to hurt my head a little bit when I saw it, because I was like, hey, like I said, both of those teams, I thought the blueprint for those games were going to be different. I thought St. Francis would win, but I thought Sycamore would score some points and force St. Francis to simply score more, and that's not the way the game played out. And honestly, I thought Rochelle would give Nazareth a better fight than they did. So, yeah, it definitely played out the strange way that I was not expecting it to start. And, of course, when we talk about the Interstate 8, the only one that survived is Morris, who lost to both of those two teams. And lost comfortably to both of those two teams. So sometimes, things just simply don't happen the way that you think they're going to.
What came out of that Morris game, I thought was fascinating because of the fact that the Morgan Park coaching staff openly talked about we're not prepared enough to play against these teams from outside of the city. What did you take away from reading that and just kind of looking into what we've seen from the CPS schools throughout the course of the year? I would agree with him, but how do you fix it?
Well, I first of all, I really appreciate Chris James' honesty in that situation, because it's something that a lot of people won't talk about openly. And that's, and I think he's trying to do what he can. I mean, they've scheduled up in the non-conference game. When you look at it, their only loss was to Marist early in the year.
It's good scheduling.
They were competitive in that game. So they've tried to go out in those non-conference games and play the best people they can. But, to be honest, and it's nobody's fault, but it's clear that Morgan Park was the best team in the public league this year. The group of teams chasing them, there was a gap between them and Morgan Park. So they just didn't have many opportunities to be in competitive games over the course of the season. And it was kind of a scheduling quirk too. Like some of the better public league teams kind of emerged out of nowhere and they weren't on Morgan Park's schedule. So they ended up having a pretty light CPL schedule after a pretty strong non-con schedule. So they went 7 weeks in the non-con schedule with like, hey, we're not getting pushed at all here. We're routing everybody every week. Their defense is thinking they can stop anybody that they run into because that's what they've done all year. And there were some warning signs in their playoff run to this point. They were giving up considerably more points to some teams that were, borderline playoff teams in the first couple of rounds. So
right.
It should have been an alarm bell saying, hey, when they run into a team that is battle tested and has some talent, will they be able to do what they need to do? And clearly they couldn't. So that was one of the more interesting things that I think I read out of this round of games was James being so open and even being open to a wild solution like, hey, if we have to solve this by leaving the public league, I'm open to it. Like I don't know if he'd be allowed.
Very intrigued by that.
Yeah, I don't know if he'd be allowed to, but I'm just like the fact that he so desperately wants to try to get his program to that point that he'd be willing to take an extreme measure like that to see if he could make it happen. That says something.
If I'm Lincoln Way East or Lincoln Way Central, I'm listening because that conference could use one more team to kind of make that. I'm just saying. Yep. But moving on, before we get a chance to move to 6A, Morris Joliet Catholic, another edition of that rivalry. Can Morris beat the Hilltoppers?
It's chapter 11 in this series in the postseason, and it hasn't gone Morris's way very much. You got to go all the way back to like the John Durgo game to find the last time that they got them.
Oh man, that's 2005 right there.
Yeah, I mean it gives me a little pause going to this game, especially considering how badly Joliet Catholic got them last year when they played in the second round of the playoffs. It's going to be very, very difficult. And the thing about that really kind of stands out to me is Joliet Catholic, since they flipped the switch to the playoffs, has just been rolling people. I mean, they have been absolutely dominant, as dominant as almost anyone has been in the state. And I think they are playing as well as they have all year at the absolute right time. Morris is going to have to bring a epic effort to make this interesting at Memorial Stadium on Saturday.
They've been lights out. Last year's whitewash was in Morris. This time it's going to be at Joliet Catholic over Joliet Memorial Stadium. So that'll be a 2:00 kickoff down there in Joliet. On to 6A we go now. I did not see Geneva pounding Lake Forest the way that they did, and I'm not sure what to make of it either because they were able to do absolutely everything right.
Yeah, I mean, and that's I just kind of got the feeling that if we did end up getting this semifinal game, that it was probably going to be more interesting than it was last year, to be frank. And I'm not sure if that's going to happen because Cary Grove, to their credit, is playing really, really good football right now.
They are.
They have not been even remotely pushed through the first 3 rounds. So you look at it, and it's definitely going to be interesting. But that was a really good sign for Geneva that they didn't have to, flirt with disaster or, fight one out in the fourth quarter. Puts them in a really good state of mind for this game, and that's where they need to be because if there's an ounce of doubt, Cary Grove will probably remove that doubt pretty quickly. So they got to go in there at the apex of their confidence level, and I think an effort like this will allow them to do that.
I think when you don't see a team like Cary Grove and you're a good football team, but you don't see them ever or regularly at all, that you don't know what you're going to go into. And having been there last year, they were just blown off the ball and everything, turnovers, pick six, everything went wrong immediately, and you knew it was over at about 6 minutes into that game. On the flip side, though, I think because of the fact that Logan Abrams is hurt, that's going to change Cary Grove's ability to continue to stay on the field with that Geneva defense, who's a little bit smaller, but also they're going to be familiar. They got tape. They've seen it on tape now. All they have to do is look at themselves from a year ago and say, okay, what mistakes do we fix? So that'll be fascinating. And the other aspect is switching it from Cary down to Burgess Field in Geneva. And, of course, the environment of Geneva is going to be absolutely electric for that for a 1 o'clock kick. I want to make sure we get some time for Richards and Kankakee. that finish, back forth in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, I was frankly a little bit shocked by this result. I really felt like we were engineering towards another Kankakee East St. Louis game. Didn't happen. Kankakee just did not execute very well in the second half. They made some mistakes, and it was some things that they have not done pretty much all year, to be completely honest, because even looking back to their one loss heading into this game, they didn't make a lot of mistakes in that Nazareth game.
No,
they just got outscored. And to see Kankakee's defense, which has been so good, give up those late, the somewhat late scores in those games and give up that lead late in the game, it was just not really, frankly, on my bingo card. I just did not see that happening. So, credit to Richards for getting it done. And they've quietly had a very good year, but you just kind of look at what they had done heading into the playoff, heading into that game. I just didn't see that as being something that would be, that was going to happen. And, I'm sure they know their history, and now they've got the behemoth that is East St. Louis.
Yep.
And I was doing a little bit of scratch research over the last couple of days. Whew. The history between East St. Louis and Richards is a terrible one for Richards, to be completely
honest. It's not good. No, it's not.
No, it is really bad. I don't know the exact number, but they've lost to Richards 3 times over the last 4 playoff years, I believe. And the margin of victory in those 3 games, I believe, is 145-0. So,
wow.
So that's probably not. But you know what? It's just like being at the poker table. You got to have a chip and a set of cards, and we'll see what happens.
Do you think we get a rematch of East St. Louis and Cary Grove on Thanksgiving weekend?
I am leaning towards believing that might happen, but I don't want to put. I think East St. Louis is going. I'll put it that way. I do think. Yeah. I do think the Geneva Cary Grove game will be a very interesting one. I would give Cary Grove the slight nod in favoritism right now.
I would agree with you on that. I would say just a couple points, but at this point, it's dependent on whether or not Geneva's offense shows up or not. And that's something that we hadn't seen in the postseason in the past, where sometimes it just shuts down. Curious to see the weather forecast for Burgess Field coming up as well on this Saturday when those two get together at 1 o'clock. All right, 7A we go here, because let's talk about Mount Carmel at Normal, because that was a thing we saw on Saturday for sure.
Yeah, definitely. That was a wild one. You could just kind of look at it, and it was I don't want to say that I didn't expect that, because they've done things like this before, but I was interested in that turned into a ping pong ball game. I didn't really think that it would. I thought that they would kind of run away and hide in that one. So kudos to Normal Community in that situation, doing what they did. At least throwing everything at them in the kitchen sink and trying to make something happen.
They played their best football game of the year, and at the best time. Honestly, that was their best football game of the year after playing against the Prospect the week before, playing in the same game back and forth. It's remarkable to see. But I was at St. Rita, leaving St. Rita after their victory over Quincy, and I'll tell you about that in a second. But just fascinating to walk out with the St. Rita fans, and they're announcing the Mount Carmel scores in the PA. Right now they're tied at 21, and they're like, what the heck is going on? Yeah. They were just as surprised as anybody else, just assuming that Mount Carmel would take care of it. So you have St. Rita and Mount Carmel coming up on Saturday. I believe the tailgating starts now at St. Rita for that one. Rita looked really good in the second half. I really liked what Quincy was doing in the first half. Kudos to the Blue Devils, because Quincy's a good football team. They're a good football program. They're not 35 points less than St. Rita. It just snowballed, and you know how it goes. Sometimes in the playoffs, it turns into absolute panic mode. And we saw mistakes that they've not made all year long. But I tell you what, if St. Rita can continue to figure out how to mix it up with Nicholas Herman and, Armbruster's as healthy as he's been, they might be able to hang with Mount Carmel in their building for quite some time on Saturday.
Yeah, it was 28-0 when they played the first time. And I got to believe that we might get the same result, but I have a feeling we're not going to get the same score. I really do. I think that, St. Rita's done some interesting things over the second half of the season to kind of boost their offensive productivity. And I do think that that's a pretty good defensive unit. So, we might end up having a much more interesting result, I think, in the week 13 matchup rather than, I believe it was the week 4 matchup between the two.
When Batavia gets into the quarterfinals, they tend to play this weird grinder game. And this is the one they got. A couple years ago it was Yorkville, and this year, and I think it was Hersey, one of those years too. This year it's Downers Grove North, and they held Owen Lansu to 7 points.
Yeah, I mean, and that says something really about how good Batavia's defense is, and it's kind of gotten lost in the shuffle with kind of the crazy offensive stuff that they've been doing in previous weeks. I mean, you go back to the week prior and the wild rally against Lincoln Way West. That never happens without a sterling effort from Batavia's defense in the second half of that game. And it kind of got lost in the shuffle because of all the craziness and the way that Batavia was scoring and doing all these things on the offensive side of the ball. None of it happens without all the 3 and outs that the Batavia defense forced to give the Bulldogs those extra offensive opportunities. So, you know, that's really was kind of a testament game to that defense, was doing that to Owen Lansu and Downers Grove North, holding them to 7 points, because I had lost complete track of that game while watching like what was going on with what I was watching. And at the end, I was like, what? Like, I looked at that score. I'm like, that's a final? Like, that was not the final score that I was expecting. I was just like, hold on a minute. Really? That's not a second quarter score? What? Yeah, that was not the blueprint that I was expecting that game to follow.
I thought Batavia could win that game, especially that the game being at Batavia. They're just a different team, I think, sometimes in that building when you get deeper into the postseason, specifically when you get to late November. But I figured Owen Lansu would be able to pick them apart. So kudos to Matt Holm and their defense to try and figure things out. They got it right. And the reason I want to give them credit is because last year we kind of, we laid them at their feet, because Mount Carmel, I think they're still scoring on that team last year, and they put 60 on them or whatever in the semifinals. Is there a chance we see a Batavia Mount Carmel game for a third year in a row in the postseason?
Yeah, I think there's a pretty good likelihood of that, to be completely honest with you. I really like what Lincoln Way Central has done. It will be interesting to see if they can pull, I don't want to say a rabbit out of their hat here, because they're not that big of an underdog, but no. I just want to know if they can finish it off here and get themselves to a state title game. But Batavia is the favorite in my mind in this game to win that game. Although I do think it's going to be an interesting environment with Batavia going into Lincoln Way Central.
Yeah,
and there it's kind of a little bit of a cozy environment there, the way that they play there. So it's, kind of a down inclined infield in there. So it's definitely, I think that's going to be a better game than a lot of people are giving it credit for.
I agree. I think the Rhodey line has it as Batavia's 6.5 point favorite going in there. But I mean, that's not a lot. I would say that for sure. Let's go to 8A now and talk about, let's talk about Loyola first. Okay. Loyola and Maine South, we see that a lot, but here we are, and Loyola looked good on Saturday.
Yeah, really pulled away in the second half, did a nice job of it, because, was kind of monitoring that as well, like trying to figure out what was going on there as I was coming back. And, obviously close game there, but Loyola, put the plow down in the second half and really got their running game going and did the things that they have to do. It's interesting. I've only seen Loyola live once this season. They were overwhelmed by East St. Louis all the way back in week 1. Yep. I'm fascinated to see them again, to see how different they look, because after watching them in week 1, I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know if they're going to be able to put the pieces of the puzzle together to give me the Loyola product that I'm used to here. But it appears that they have. So it's going to be really, really interesting. I mean, I'll tell you that much. That's a semifinal game that, to be honest with you, I was hoping we'd get, just because of the long track record of those two teams.
Yeah, and it's fun being down at Lincoln Way East for a semifinal game. I've been there a couple of times. It's really a cool environment for sure. I did not see York blowing away Warren the way that they did. I expected a tighter game, but the York Dukes are for real.
Yeah, at some point I'm going to just have to accept that York is an outstanding playoff program right now. They are a team that when we get into the playoffs,
they're going to be there.
It's almost like they flip some kind of a switch and say, okay, guys, let's take it up a couple notches. We got to get going here, because not only have they been winning playoff games, they've been beating teams that heading into the postseason were teams that everyone was like, keep an eye on these guys, keep an eye on these guys. And all York has been doing is demolishing every one of those teams along this path. It took Edwardsville took them out, no problem. Just overwhelmed Oswego, a team that had not lost all season and basically had not given up anywhere near as many points as they had given up against York. So it's just like at some point you just kind of have to tip your cap and say, this is a really good football team. Unfortunately for me, I didn't really recognize that until basically this week. How good this team really is. So it should be that's another really interesting semifinal game on paper.
Yeah, I think so too. And I got to see Naperville Central in Lyons Township, but it was electric to start, but it was quiet immediately because Lyons, that was the biggest game in their school's history. When you think about it, they were coming in 11-0. This is the first team to go undefeated throughout the whole regular season since I think 1947, unblemished. If they could get that far. And then Naperville Central just basically kept running the ball and pounding them. Aiden Clark, I was very impressed with what he did. 35 carries the week before, 33 carries this time around, over 100 yards. As much as we get the flash of Deshaun Williams and Sebastian Hayes, and by the way, Sebastian's got quite the arm. I wasn't really impressed with his actual cannon that he's got there. But the thing is that the only reason those things work is because they continue to stick with the run and make sure that the run sets them up. And that is extremely dangerous here in November.
Yeah, it is. And, when you look at it, obviously their only loss was to Lincoln Way East, a team that has not been pushed all season long. But I've been really impressed with what Naperville Central's just kind of been able to do. And a lot of the things that you've mentioned, it's like they know what they are.
They know what they are.
Yep. Do. And they know what they do well. They emphasize those things. And if maybe one or two plays don't go their way, they don't abandon those things. They go back to them because they know that those are the things that they do. They don't try to make themselves into something that they're not. They're not trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And that's a pretty great thing to have at this type of year, just having a full understanding of what your strengths are. And if you have those weaknesses, knowing how to paper over them a little bit, so it's not quite so significantly exploited by an opponent. So that's a really, really nice job. And we haven't mentioned Lincoln Way East, which was the team that I saw on Friday night at this point. And
what'd you learn?
I'll tell you, I felt bad for Stevenson, somewhat early in that game because I started thinking to myself, Jonas Williams broke off a 60-yard touchdown in the second quarter. That was a pretty impressive run. Later in the game, he broke off an 84-yard touchdown run, which was ridiculous. And I was in I had a strange vantage point for that game. I was on the opposite sideline when he did it. And I watched as he simply accelerated and ran away from the defense to the point where I was like, that's not a quarterback. He looked genuinely like a running back. And I started to think to myself, Stevenson probably game planned for a whole bunch of things based on what they expected Lincoln Way East to do.
And that wasn't one of them.
I guarantee they did not game plan for Jonas Williams rushing for 160 yards against them. I'm pretty confident that they did not plan for that. And that was, I'm like, well, what do you do? I mean, you have so many things that you have to try to focus on when trying to slow down somebody like Lincoln Way East. And then Jonas Williams rolls up and says, you know what, guys? I feel like I'm going to run for 3 touchdowns tonight, 160. Let's see how that goes. And then just does it and makes it look easy. It wasn't a situation where it was like, oh, yeah, he broke a couple of tackles, made a really, really good. No, he just was like, hey, I'm just going to zip over here. Here's a gap. I'm just going to run in there. I'm going to get this done. I'm going to break this tackle, shake this guy off, and I'm just going to saunter on into the end zone. No problem. No big deal. And then the other thing that made me laugh is he didn't bother to throw a touchdown pass until late in the third quarter. So I'm like, I guarantee if you would have told Stevenson before the game is you're going to hold Jonas Williams without a touchdown pass until late in the third quarter, you're going to feel good about your situation? And they probably would have.
Yeah.
In reality, that made it 35-0. So it was just like, all right, what are you going to do here? So, yeah, just a really, really impressive team. And that's what makes this semifinal so interesting because obviously Lincoln Way East has stumbled at the hands of Loyola in multiple seasons, including the last 2 state championship games in 8A. I know that their coaching staff is probably not all that excited about playing Loyola again. They'd rather not, but I think
But I know their fans are.
The players are pretty excited about the opportunity to show off this version of Lincoln Way East because it's a special thing. It is a really special team, and I'm fascinated to see how this I guess it's chapter 6 of this recent rivalry comes to fruition. And I've seen the grand majority of them in person, so
yeah,
I've got a little bit of a history with this rivalry too. So it should be great.
I think those fans are sick of driving 90 minutes to watch their team lose to Loyola, and so then they get them in their building, and I think the building is going to explode if things go off to a good start. Hey, only disappointing thing with Lincoln Way East, they didn't get to 49. They got 45, but they didn't get to 49. So I'm sure that you're kind of saddened by that. Are we going to get a rematch from Week 9 with Lincoln Way East and Naperville Central?
Boy, right now I'm not really even sure what's going to happen in that other semifinal. I'm not comfortable making a call right now on.
We could get all 4 of them down there at some point.
And I do think this is definitely a shoe on the other foot type of situation right now. I don't know how many times I can say that Loyola was going to a playoff game where I think they're an underdog, and I think they're an underdog.
I think they're an underdog. Yes, I would agree with you. Also, last thing I want to add in here, just because I mentioned Sebastian Hayes, he had 2 ACL tears, sophomore and junior year. Yeah. He is a wonderful story. If you want a guy to root for in this postseason, he's your man, and so that's something that is something I'll be paying attention to. By the way, York Naperville Central is the TV game this week, so you get to watch that on free if you want. What should we watch for this weekend? Where are you headed for sure? Have we figured this out?
Well, on Saturday night, I'm doing the Lincoln Way East Loyola game.
So you're going to do that? Okay.
Yeah, that one. As soon as that was secured, I'm like, well, that's where I'm going. I didn't expect them to play on Saturday evening. I thought it was going to be a 1:00 game. So then I thought I was going to have the opportunity to go somewhere else. I was probably going to just jet over to Lincoln Way Central Batavia. Obviously can't do that now. So it opened up some possibilities for the early game. Like I said, I'm mulling what I'm going to do in that 1:00 game. Right now, I'm leaning towards St. Francis of Nazareth. Coal City is closer for me, so I might make that trip as well. I have not decided. I'm intrigued by both, and it's one of those times where, and I know you've talked about this in past, I think if someone gave me the opportunity to just watch a 4-corner screen with all the games and the feeds, I might take that option instead. But I do like the live semifinal playoff experience, and I will try to do what I usually do, which is randomly scour every source that I can find to kind of keep an unofficial live scoreboard of everything that's going on Saturday afternoon.
I'm telling you, for everyone watching and listening, the semifinal round is the absolute best environment anywhere in the state. I love the state championship. Don't get me wrong. I broadcasted those things. I love those. But there is nothing like the intensity and the urgency of a semifinal when you're this close. And so I'm going to go my own backyard because I haven't seen a semifinal game in my own town in 16 years. And so I'm going to go see that for a little bit here. Hopefully I'll be in a good enough mood to go somewhere else for sure after that. Well, we'll see about that for sure. And it'll be nice to have one of the best games in town, too. Last couple times they've hosted a semifinal game here in Geneva, you weren't really sure about it in terms of, like, can they hang with them here? I do feel like this is pretty even here. And, East St. Louis potentially waiting on the other side. So that should be fun. Hey, semifinal Saturday is great. I always pitch the whip around the red zone attempt where we could just like line them up like little by little, schedule them every 20 minutes apart.
Yep.
I pitch this to the IHSA every year, and I pitch it to the TV partners. One of these years, someone's going to pick it up. I promise you. I get closer and closer to getting that. And you got to move one game to Friday night. Just one. Yep. Just one game to Friday night. And my pick would have been Loyola and Lincoln Way East to move Friday night for sure. That's how I would have
done. But I knew it wasn't going to happen. Like, my only hope was that maybe the two teams that actually played Friday night this week could have accepted a Friday night game. York and Naperville Central could have done it logistically. Yeah. They would have not. Neither one of them would have been giving up the day of prep. It would have been even. So I had a little sliver of hope for that one.
Hoping.
But obviously it did not materialize, and they're all on Saturday. So I'll take a rare Friday night off from the fray. But I would much rather be watching a game somewhere if it was available to me.
You enjoy it, sir. Everyone else enjoy the semifinals. We thank you for watching and listening. For Steve Soucie, I'm Matt Rodewald saying so long. We'll see you next time in the Friday Night Drive podcast here at Shaw Local.